No one had invited war to Pearl Harbor.
American crews fought back.
The harbor was barely recognizable. More than 2,400 Americans were killed.
What followed was not just destruction, it was transformation.
The attack did not stop with one strike. It kept pressing, wave after wave.
American crews fought back where they could, often with seconds to prepare.
It was uneven, improvised, and desperate, but it was resistance.
In every direction, men were forced to become more than they thought they could be.
The heroes of that morning did not look heroic. They looked exhausted, scared, and determined. Courage arrived with shaking hands and smoke in the lungs.
No one had invited war to Pearl Harbor, but now everyone had to answer it.
The strike spread across Oahu, targeting not just ships, but the island's ability to respond. The goal was simple: hit fast, hit hard, and leave America stunned.
Yet even inside the confusion, men kept finding each other.
Some gave directions, some carried the wounded, some simply refused to leave anyone behind.
It was no longer about the plan for the day. It was about getting through the next minute.
The harbor itself seemed to groan under the weight of what was happening. Fire floated on the water, metal twisted, morning light disappeared behind smoke.
Somewhere between shock and instinct, the men of Pearl Harbor kept going.
And through all of it, the noise never seemed to end.
Engines screamed overhead, each pass threatening another hit.
It was not enough to stop the attack, but it was enough to say they were still there.
Eventually, the pace began to change, not because the pain was over, but because the worst had already happened. The planes started to turn back. The explosions came farther apart. And then came the silence, the kind that arrives only after something unimaginable. The harbor was barely recognizable.
Battleship Row was scarred. Airfields were damaged. The whole base had been shaken.
There was no time to process grief. Too many still needed help.
Medics worked on instinct, focus, and whatever strength they still had. Some men stared across the water, as if the morning might somehow rewind itself.
Ordinary things remained where they had fallen. Coffee cups, letters, unfinished plans.
The day had started with ordinary life. That was part of what made the loss feel impossible.
More than 2,400 Americans were killed. Thousands more were injured.
Across the country, families heard the news and felt the distance collapse.
Hawaii was no longer far away. It was suddenly personal. Shock moved through living rooms, factory floors, and city streets, all at once. The next day, the nation turned its attention to Washington. The president stood before Congress with words that would echo through history.
Courage arrived with shaking hands and smoke in the lungs.
It was not just a speech, it was a turning point.
From that moment on, America was no longer watching the war from a distance.
Shock turned into motion. Men enlisted.
Factories roared awake, ready to build for a war that now belonged to everyone.
Families prepared for sacrifice, not knowing how long the road ahead would be.
Pearl Harbor had awakened a nation and pushed it into the center of world history. A country once divided on entering the war now stood together with unusual clarity.
Pearl Harbor was more than an attack. It was a national awakening. But before it became history, it was human.
It was coffee on a deck, a joke between friends, a letter home left unfinished.
That is why the loss still lands so deeply. It shattered ordinary life in an instant.
And yet what survives in memory is not only destruction, it is courage.
Courage that did not ask permission. Courage that simply acted.
Men saved each other because there was nothing else to do but stand up for one another.
Some dates are remembered because they happened. This one is remembered because it changed people.
In a single morning, America lost the luxury of standing on the sidelines.
That is what Pearl Harbor became. A wound, a warning, and a turning point.
Even decades later, that morning still feels close.
Not only because of what was destroyed, but because of who was there.
The sunrise still looks beautiful. That may be the hardest part to understand.
Because sometimes history does not begin with a speech or a battle line.
Sometimes it begins with one morning, one surprise attack, and one nation forced to change.
Pearl Harbor was not just an attack. It was the moment America was pulled into war, and the moment the world was never quite the same again.